Ever since the Watergate scandal, investigators have always been looking for what they call the smoking gun to prove that the crime was committed and who did it. Well, they found a smoking gun in the Benghazi hearings yesterday. Unfortunately, it was obscured by, 12 hours of verbose discussions about topics that were partisan and sometimes irrelevant. But the smoking gun really stands out and was highlighted by Jim Jordan, the congressman from Ohio, a Republican. Jordan produced three pieces of evidence, three smoking guns, that indicate that Hillary Clinton knew full well on September 11th, 2012, that the Benghazi attack was, in fact, a premeditated and pre-planned terrorist attack, not a spontaneous reaction to a video that got out of hand. The first was an email that Hillary sent to Chelsea, her daughter, saying that the terrorists attacked us and we lost two very good men. There were four lost, two more later. The second was a memo of a phone call she had that night with the Prime Minister of Egypt, in which she specifically said, our sources indicate that the video had nothing to do with it. And the third was a conversation with the president of Libya, also a memorandum describing that, in which she again said that Ansar al-Sharia, an affiliate of al-Qaeda, was responsible for the attack. So in all three of those, there was a clear indication that she knew damn well that this was a premeditated terrorist attack, and that all the stuff she and the president cooked up about claiming that it was a video simply to nullify its impact in the election 56 days later was absolutely baloney. In fact, later in the testimony, Hillary said, we didn't finally firmly conclude that it was not a demonstration gone bad and was a premeditated terrorist attack until the video arrived from our cameras outside the compound on September 18th, 7 days after the attack. And at that point, it was evident that there was no demonstration. Well, how come on September 25th, a week later, President Obama goes before the UN General Assembly and spends 10 minutes talking about the inflammatory video and how terrible that was and how it provoked violence? This is as good as a smoking gun gets. Now, in addition to that, there are a few insights that I have knowing Hillary in her hearing in her testimony. The first is her line, which is basically, security was not my department. She said, I was responsible for sending Stevens. I was responsible for having a compound there. I was responsible for deciding whether to terminate it or keep it going. But then she said specifically, but I was not responsible for security at the compound. Well, that's quite a variant on the buck stops here, Harry Truman's definition of the presidency. Apparently the buck did not stop with the Secretary of State. If the Secretary of State is not in charge of the Secretary of State's security operation, who is? Obviously she was in charge, and obviously she did not focus on it. She probably regarded security as beneath her, not of sufficient policy gravitas, and an essentially administrative function in which she need not be involved. I also was reminded as I listened to the testimony about how easily Sidney Blumenthal got in touch with her and how almost impossible it was for Chris Stevens to get in touch with her while she was Secretary of State. What my own experience was in dealing with Bill in the White House. I had incredible access to him, and the senior members of his administration did not. I remember at one point I was meeting with Dick Holbrooke 2 years after he had negotiated the Dayton Accords that ended the war in Bosnia. And Holbrooke told me, and I almost fell off the chair, that he had never met President Clinton privately. He said, I've seen him 2 or 3 times, but always in groups, and I've never had a private conversation with him. And that absolutely floored me. And here I was talking to him every day. Then a few months later, it came home to me very graphically when Holbrooke called me and said, I'm about to go on a mission to confront Milosevic, the dictator of Serbia, over violations in the Dayton Accord. And he said, but I'm not authorized to threaten a renewal of economic sanctions. And I said, I think the president wants you to threaten that. And he said, nope, Tony Lake and Warren Christopher, National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, have ordered me not to. So I said, well, let me call you back. And I picked up the phone and got Clinton on the phone, as I always did, and told him Holbrooke doesn't think he's authorized to threaten sanctions. And Clinton said, you tell him he is authorized to threaten sanctions. I want him to threaten sanctions. Without sanctions, we'll never get Milosevic to back down. So I called Holbrooke and I said, the president has just told me that you are authorized to threaten sanctions, and the president has every intention of imposing sanctions if Milosevic doesn't back down. Who is I, a politician, a political intermediary, a strategic advisor to the president, to be carrying that kind of message from one to the other? There was another time when Holbrooke called me and said our men in Saudi Arabia were exposed after the Khobar Towers bombing to a repeat of that bombing. And I called Clinton, and he the next day ordered them dispersed into the desert. The point about this was with Bill, and it now seems with Hillary, and certainly in my experience was true with Hillary, political questions get top priority. You go right to the top of the heap, and you get all the access you want. But if all you are is a struggling ambassador or a cabinet secretary or even the point man on key negotiations, you can wait for weeks, months, before you actually have direct contact with either of the Clintons. Just struck such a memorable chord with me. Thanks for watching. Today's